Hello and welcome to earlymusicsources.com. My name is Elam Rotem, and today we'll have a look at Tomás de Santamaria's approach to counterpoint. The book The Art of Playing the Fantasia by Tomás de Santamaria is an enormous treatise, touching almost every aspect a musician, and specifically a keyboard player, must master in order to become a professional. A great part of the treatise is dedicated to a practical approach to the study of counterpoint, sitting with your hands on the keyboard, trying and testing different solutions. Naturally, we cannot cover his entire treatise, but we will focus on his approach to consonances, which are the core ingredient of any piece of music. Let's start. First, some words on the source. It seems that Tomás de Santamaria started writing Arte de tañer fantasia, the art or manner of playing the fantasia, already in the 1540s. It was ready for print by 1557, but published only in 1565. It is written in Spanish, and on the cover it says that the work was examined and approved by the well-known organist and composer Antonio de Cabezón. The main aim of the treatise, as the title suggests, is to teach the playing of fantasias on the keyboard, by which Santamaria meant improvised polyphonic pieces which include imitations. But in order to learn this, judging from the contents of his book, one has to know almost everything that there is to know about music, from rather specific performance practice aspects such as hand positions on the keyboard, touch, fingering, ornaments, to more general subjects such as solmization, musica ficta, modes, tuning, counterpoint, and more counterpoint. It is truly a comprehensive source which is not often quoted. It might be that it was overshadowed by the writings of the famous Zarlino, who published his works more or less in the same period, but in Italy. A large portion of the treatise is dedicated to accompanying stepwise ascending and descending melodies with consonances in 4 parts. He writes that in this way one may learn how to add consonances to every melody, or to harmonize if you wish. Also, since composing and playing in 4 parts is the most common and most essential way, he focuses on that. Generally, the subject of counterpoint, even for professional musicians, might be intimidating. Sometimes the impression is that counterpoint is something so intricate that it is something only true maestri can grasp. There is, of course, intricate counterpoint, but at its core, counterpoint is merely the playing together of notes that fit with each other, or in more correct terms, consonant with each other. In the musical system that we are dealing with, luckily, there are merely 4 kinds of consonances. Remember this whenever you are lost and feel confused about counterpoint. The 4 consonances are unison, that is the same note, third, fifth, and sixth. Each of these may also be in higher octaves and retain the same consonant quality. These are called compound intervals: octave, 10th, 12th, 13th, and so on. An important point is that although there are 4 kinds of consonances, only 3 kinds can be used at the same time, as the 5th and 6th contradict each other, and if only consonances should be used, it is either the 5th or the 6th. The other remaining intervals, that is 2nd, 4th, and 7th, and their compound variants, are dissonances, that as opposed to consonances cannot be used without special care. According to Santamaria, the 4th is a bit exceptional, since as opposed to other dissonances, it may appear in between several voices without making the harmony dissonant. But when the 4th is measured from the lowest voice, as all intervals should be, it is a dissonance for all intents and purposes. Among the consonances, there are 2 classes: perfect consonances, fifths and octaves, and imperfect consonances, thirds and sixths. According to Santa Maria, this is because thirds and sixths can be either major or minor and still keep their consonant status, while fifths and octaves are rigid. If one augments or diminishes them, they simply transform into dissonances. A very important distinction between perfect and imperfect consonances is that perfect intervals may not be succeeded in movement by the same perfect intervals. That is, a fifth may not be succeeded by another fifth, and a unison, or an octave for that matter, may not be succeeded by another one. However, imperfect consonances may follow each other at will. Santa Maria explains that the reason for this is that imperfect consonances are varied. In a sequence of such, there will be use of altering major and minor variants. Statements about the importance of variety in all musical aspects are repeated many times in Santa Maria's text, but also often found in other sources from that period. This is why, even though imperfect intervals may be repeated at will, repeating the same interval for too long would be considered not varied enough. Therefore, Santa Maria recommends, instead of repeating only thirds or only sixths, to intermingle them. As we said, Santa Maria wants to immediately apply things practically in 4 parts. To do so, one puts the highest voice at the desired interval from the lowest voice, and in between adds 2 inner voices on consonant notes. Now, in order to prevent the voices from clashing, there must be sufficient distance between the lowest and highest voice. This is why Santa Maria notes that in order to play in 4 voices, one must use compound intervals, that is, intervals of an octave and higher. We take for granted that simple intervals and compound intervals are basically the same, but Santa Maria always insisted on differentiating between them. Therefore, we will try to follow him on this and do the same. Disclaimer: some of the examples shown in this video are not quotes from Santa Maria's treatise, but inspired by his concepts and were created in an effort to make his ideas clearer in the short time the video allows. Here is how Santa Maria shows the 4 consonances in 4 voices, or more precisely, above a C in the bass, an octave, 10th, 12th, 13th, and back. And now, instead of counting the intervals from a sustained lowest voice in relation to the highest voice, he counts them from a sustained highest voice to the lowest voice. And the outcome is naturally very different. In a way, the 2 examples are not so different. After all, the intervals between the lowest and the highest voice are the same. And yet, especially when looking at it from a modern perspective, the harmonic consequences of these examples are very distant from one another. Just this is what is so special about Santa Maria's approach. As you will see, he often just fiddled with the numbers, the intervals, arriving this way at interestingly different results. Let's continue. We will continue to follow Santa Maria's instructions. In order to build a 4-part texture, we will fill the gap between the lowest and highest voice with 2 inner voices. Santa Maria stresses that the precise notes which the inner parts take affect how the harmony sounds, and that there are some positions that sound better than others, as well as some that should be used only when no other choice is possible. Naturally, the further the outer voices are away from each other, the larger the number of possible variants for the inner parts. He demonstrates how chords with a 10th on top can have 5 different possible positions for the inner parts. He then makes 4 categories of positions, from the best to the worst. To spare you the details, here is a summary. These are the best and most desirable positions for the 4 consonances. There are 2 main reasons for the worst positions, which are sometimes unavoidable. 1. If only 2 kinds of consonances are used instead of 3, that is, 2 consonances are doubled, leaving the 3rd potential consonants missing. 2. When the inner parts include a 6th or a 13th. Interestingly, from a modern point of view, a chord that has a 6th or a 13th in its inner parts is a chord which is fundamentally different. It is an inverted chord, a chord that does not have the real bass of the harmony in the lowest voice. But for Santa Maria, such a chord is merely a weak variant of the positions of the inner voices. This is truly a different way of looking at music. Now that we know better how to build 4-part chords, Santa Maria presents a chapter called The 10 Different Ways of Ascending and Descending Stepwise in Consonant Chords. In this chapter, he presents 10 different formulas of intervals that can be used when accompanying an ascending or descending stepwise soprano part. For example, the first way is by using only tenths. Then he includes ways utilizing 2 intervals. For example, a tenth and then an octave, or a tenth and then a 12th, and so on. Santa Maria is very thorough. He brings examples of sequences with compound intervals, but then also with double compound and even triple compound intervals. Sometimes the outcome is not really playable on a clavichord, his favorite practicing instrument, and at the same time also not singable by singers due to the extreme ranges. What is it for then? Sometimes it seems like a consequence of a theory that perhaps got a bit out of hand. Nevertheless, inspired by his way of thinking, we can learn and experiment with intervals. Let's take a little 3-step progression, ut, re, mi, in the soft hexachord, F, G, A, and harmonize it 5 times with different intervals. In the first one, let's put an octave, followed by a 12th, and then a 10th. In the second one, let's start with a 10th, followed by a 13th, and then again a 10th. In the third one, let's use again a 10th and a 13th, but finish on a 15th, which is just 2 octaves. As you see, because of the last step, that to our ears sounds like a half cadence, the inner voices had to adapt. On the fourth one, let's start with a 12th, followed by a 15th, and then another 12th. To make the alto line smoother, I put a 13th instead of a 12th in the second step. In basso continuo terms, it means simply changing the chord to a 6 chord. And for the last example, out of many more potential possibilities, we'll start with a 13th, followed by a 12th, and finish with a 17th, which is just a third and 2 octaves. Since the distance between the lowest and highest voice is growing, we will try to spread the inner voices in the gap and avoid crowding the voices close to the soprano, even if it's more comfortable in the hand. Let's listen again to all these examples and enjoy the variety of sounds that the different intervals create. Nowadays, we are trained to build and analyze music from the bass. But as you see, for Santa Maria, the bass and in fact the entire harmonic progression is just a consequence of the intervals he chose to utilize. From a modern perspective, this is odd and refreshing at the same time. Now, don't get the impression that it is possible to just throw in whatever numbers we want and legitimate counterpoint will result. As we said once in another episode, musica ficta troubles are waiting at every corner of the musica vera. Let's see. After countless examples of ways to ascend and descend in four parts, Santa Maria presents a chapter entitled 4 Faults that may be committed through stepwise ascent and descent in consonant chords. Fault number 1. Fa against mi. As we discussed in the episode about musica ficta, some imperfections are embedded in the musical system, and quite easily one may arrive at impure perfect intervals, that is, diminished and augmented fifths or fourths, either harmonically or melodically. These must be either avoided or corrected. When correcting, mostly it will be changing mi notes into fa notes, or expressed more practically by using flats rather than sharps. This is not mentioned explicitly by Santa Maria, but evident in his choices. Fault number 2. Leaving the mode. According to Santa Maria, leaving the mode is a grave error and might happen for 2 reasons. When jumping from the soft to the hard hexachord, or vice versa, without it being absolutely necessary, and when making cadences on notes which are improper to the mode. Let's listen to the example he gives to demonstrate that. Fault number 3. Awkwardness. Santa Maria writes that due to the 2 faults he mentioned, awkwardness may arise. Indeed, the former example sounded rather awkward. He adds, however, that there are other reasons for such awkwardness to come about, but unfortunately does not explain this any further. Fault number 4. Improper melodic leaps. To maintain sweet and comfortable melodies in the independent lines, as is necessary according to all counterpoint methods, some melodic intervals are simply not allowed. He mentions the 6th, 7th, 9th, and 11th. He adds that while a major 6th is completely prohibited, minor 6ths are only prohibited in the bass, while quite common in the upper voice. To further demonstrate the potential faults that may arise, he brings a case in which one wishes to accompany the notes from E to B, ascending and descending, with octaves and tenths. By the way, without any explanations, he adds a sharp to the F in the soprano. Luckily, it does not interfere with the point of the example, so we will take it as it is and ignore it. In this demonstration, there are no less than 3 cases of Fa against mi. The bass leaps from F to B, Fa to mi. The alto has a melodic contour of B to F, mi to Fa, and the chord on the B has a diminished fifth, again B to F, mi to Fa. To correct this, one may try to add F and C sharps, or more likely to add B and E flats. The problem is that both solutions will take us away from the mode of the original line. So, Santa Maria suggests to simply use other intervals. Instead of octaves and then tenths, to start with tenths and then octaves. The result is fundamentally different from the first solution, but at least it is correct. Again, Santa Maria shows us how merely playing with the numbers brings about interestingly different results. Even though Santa Maria tediously supplied us with endless examples of his 10 different ways of ascending and descending, He admits that if one were to only use a single way, one may quickly end up with one or more of the 4 faults he mentioned. Therefore, the ways must be intermingled. One must consider, test, and experiment which intervals will best fit the specific situation, according to the preceding and following chords. In this way, one may learn and practice counterpoint, and eventually get better and quicker at it. This was naturally just a taste of what Santa Maria has to offer regarding the studying and practicing of consonances. Do go on and read what he has to say in detail, and play his examples yourself. Perhaps there will be other opportunities to touch on other subjects discussed in this gigantic treatise. But for now, this was it. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to check the special page on our website with all the footnotes and other extra information. If you enjoy Early Music Sources, consider supporting it on Patreon. Comment, share and like. See you next time at earlymusicsources.com.